Hello everyone, and welcome to game 19 of the 1960 World Chess Championship match between Mikhail Tal and Mikhail Botvinnik. Now, after that long game 18, and game 18 was the longest game in the match, Botvinnik requested a timeout, as he really needed to prepare, he needed to meditate and figure out how to continue this match, as Tal was still 3 points in the lead, and Botvinnik really has to do something, and he has to do it now if he wants to even try and get back into this match. So Tal also appreciated this time to rest, and he also had to figure out how to approach this, because even though he was 3 points in the lead, he still knew that it wasn't really over. So him and Koblenz, they had a deal that Tal will no longer use e4, that he will now open this game with c4. And they knew that Botvinnik will definitely go for a very sharp variation. They didn't think that he would go for some sort of a symmetrical English. They knew that he would do something, they just didn't know what it was. So let's see the game. Without further ado, Tal opens the game with c4. And already kind of a surprise on the first move, we have f5. So Botvinnik goes for the Dutch. As the quote says above the board, since Botvinnik's favorite system was the stone wall, I'll refrain temporarily from d4, so I might be able to ram the wall with the d3 and e4. So Tal doesn't want to allow Botvinnik the standard stone wall structure with e6, d5 and c6. Rather, Tal goes for knight to f3, and then he will later play maybe d4 and d4 to attack the center. So knight to f6, we have g3 and now g6, and this was the real surprise, as to Tal's knowledge, Botvinnik never played this. This is the Leningrad variation, and for this reason this game is sometimes called, and it is called so on the official chessgames.com, the fall of Leningrad, but you know, you'll see what I mean. So bishop to g2, bishop g7, and now d4. We have d6, knight to c3, e6, we have castles, and queen to c2. Tal says that instead of queen to c2, he did consider maybe rook to e1, with the idea of pushing e4 next, but he didn't want to allow knight to e4. Even though knight to e4 might not be great for black, he just didn't want to allow it, as Botvinnik did surprise him with this line, so maybe Botvinnik really brought some poison. So instead, queen to c2, now preparing e4, but also stopping knight to e4. We have knight to c6, rook to d1, and now queen to e7. Rook to b1. Tal wants to push b4 and b5 to kick this knight away from this beautiful c6 square, and he thinks rook to b1 is a better move than a3, as it also moves the rook from the a1 square, where it could become a target in the future, because this bishop is on g7. So we have a5 preventing b4, now comes a3, again preparing b4, and here knight to d8. And there is no longer there's no longer the need to push b4, as even if the pawns expand on the queen side, there's no real threat, as the knight is no longer on c6. So instead Tal strikes in the center. e4, we have f captures on e4, knight captures, and queen captures on e4. And there are a lot of ideas here. In the game, knight to f7 was played. Tal says that e5, although it seems like a great idea, because white doesn't seem to have the option of capturing the pawn, as the bishop to f5 is coming, the rook is now on b1. That's not really true, because you can capture, and after bishop here, you do have queen to d5 check. And after you block, then you have e captures on d6, now attacking black's queen. And after queen to f7, white can simply retreat, queen to d2, bishop captures on c4, and now white has a whole lot of options. He can either capture here, he can either go knight to g5, start an attack because the queen is already protecting the f2 pawn, he can go b3, develop a bishop here. Too many options for white, so black is basically lost here. So instead, after queen to e4, knight to f7, now preparing it. Now comes knight to bishop to h3, again preventing Botvinnik from pushing e5. Queen to f6, and now comes bishop to d2. if you play a move like king to g2, then comes d5, and d5 is a very dangerous move because of c captures, e captures, and now your queen is attacked, but also there's an open attack on the bishop on h3. And now after you move the queen, now comes the bishop captures, king captures, and after knight to d6, it's an extremely dangerous position. The rook and queen are eyeing the knight here. You have to defend it somehow. You can't move the knight because the f2 pawn is hanging. You could defend it with king to g2, but then this knight is coming to d4 to e4, and it's an excellent position for black. So instead, bishop to d2, now comes d5, and now queen to e2. Of course, you're not going to capture on d5 because of the similar variation we've just shown. Only the bishop on h3 is now undefended. D captures on c4, and now bishop to f4. Tal is now attacking the c7 pawn. Knight to d6, and now comes knight to g5 with a triple attack on the e6 pawn. Rook to e8 defending, and here you will see what devious plan Tal comes up with, just because Botvinnik played this rook to e8 move. And the idea is possible because the rook is now placed on e8. So let's see what Tal's idea is. First, bishop to g2. There is no longer point of attacking the e6 pawn, so he transfers the bishop. It's now hard for black to develop. The bishop can't really move. If Tal wants, he can always capture the knight on d6 and then pick up the b7 pawn and the c4 pawn. So you definitely have to do something. So rook to a6, preparing b5. Tal plays knight to e4. We have knight captures, bishop captures, and now b5. So it seems that all is protected. Okay, the c7 pawn is still under attack, but Tal has a different idea. He plays b3. We have pawn captures on b3, and now queen captures on b5. And this was the idea. Now the queen gains a tempo because the rook on e8 is undefended. So rook goes back, rook to f8, and now queen captures on b3. So grabbing back the pawn, we have rook to b6, attacking the queen. Queen goes to e3, and now rook captures on b1. Bishop captures on b1, and now bishop to b7. Botvinnik realizes that there's no real way of actually defending this pawn. If you play something like queen to e7, the simple rook to c1, and really there's no way to defend this pawn. You're going to lose it anyway. So instead, Botvinnik tries to create some counterplay, bishop to b7. And here, bishop to a2. Tal could capture the bishop the pawn on c7 immediately. For example, bishop captures, but he didn't want to allow bishop to h6. Now you're kind of harassed here by the bishop. You can't capture because of queen captures on f2. You could play f4, which is fine for white, but then you're opening up your king for no reason, and maybe you're giving black too much counterplay. So instead of capturing immediately, first bishop to a2, attacking the e6 pawn. Bishop to d5 defending, now bishop captures, pawn captures, and only now bishop captures on c7. a4, as the pawn on a5 was attacked, rook to d3, and now comes queen to f5. Bishop to e5, offering some exchanges in the center, and here rook to h6 was played in the game, but Tal also says that rook to e8 was kind of a threat, but it doesn't actually work, because after you play this, simply queen to e2 and white is perfectly fine, because now if you capture, you always have this rook to e3, and now it's actually black that's pinned, and white will still exchange everything and go up into an endgame, being up a pawn. So after bishop to e5, we have bishop to h6, a similar idea. You can't capture because of queen captures on f2. Queen to e2, and now rook to c8. And here, it's very hard to find the move for Tal. If you play something like king to g2, you allow queen to e4 with the exchange of queens, and then it's, you will still be up a pawn, but will you be able to do anything here? Probably not. So here, Tal again tries to trick Botvinnik. He plays rook to f3, and here you have to play very precisely, but Botvinnik is once again in time trouble. He plays queen to h3, and queen to h3 seems like an incredible move, because black is threatening rook to c1, and it's very hard to prevent rook to c1 because the bishop on h6 is also guarding the c1 square, and the queen is slicing all the way here. It looks like it's game over for Mikhail Tal, but here Tal plays a brilliant move, And this move is considered to be one of the greatest moves ever played. Maybe not due to its strength, but because it was played in such an important game, in such an important match. So, what's the idea behind Tal allowing all of this? Feel free to pause the video and try to find Tal's brilliant move. So, as usual, I will give it a couple of seconds. You are Tal, beat Botvinnik. Play a move. So, for those of you who found the move, congratulations, you have just defeated Mikhail Botvinnik, and for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, here Tal played bishop to c7. Indeed, it seems like an odd move. What's the bishop doing here? Well, for one, it prevents rook to c1. Seems like a reasonable idea. The thing is, if you play rook captures on c7, then white simply plays queen to e8, check, king goes to g7, and queen to f8 is checkmate. And here, Botvinnik, like he was in time trouble, the best idea would be to play something like queen to d7, get the queen into the game, and now bishop to f4, gaining a tempo on this bishop on h6. And after bishop captures, rook captures, white would pretty much solve all of his problems. There's no more problem of rook to c1 checkmate, and black's own d-pawn will be preventing black from checking the white king on this diagonal after the king goes to g2. But after bishop to c7, Botvinnik played bishop to f8, now stopping queen to 8, check by blocking with the bishop. So here Tal plays queen to b5, and now you see the real idea of bishop to c7. And this is something that Botvinnik missed. Now again, the problem of playing rook captures on c7 lies in queen captures on d5. Now whatever black plays in a short series of moves, for example king to g7, queen e5 check, and now you lose the rook. King g8, queen captures on c7, it's game over. But on queen b5, Botvinnik responded queen to e6, but it's no better. For example, instead of queen here, you could have also played queen to h5, attacking the rook with the idea that Tal's bishop is still under attack. But Tal had an answer for this as well. Simply king to g2, defend the rook, and now if rook captures on c7, now you get queen to e8. It doesn't matter that the bishop is blocking because you're threatening queen captures on f8. And after queen to h6 blocking this, now comes queen e6 check, king moves, now queen e5 check, king moves, and now you don't even have to capture the rook immediately. You could simply spit in your opponent's face and play queen captures on d5 with check. King has to move, and now you play queen e5 check, king moves, and now queen captures on c7. You're up the exchange, you're up 2 pawns. This is completely winning. So, after queen to b5 by Tal, Botvinnik played queen e6, and now we have bishop to e5. And now you see that the situation is drastically changed from the way it was a couple of moves ago. Now all of Tal's pieces are active, black doesn't really have any threats, and the bishop on e5 is completely slicing through the black king's position. Botvinnik played queen to c6, trying to exchange queens. Here we have queen to a5, and now rook to a8. Tal also was hoping for Botvinnik to fall for bishop captures on a3. This doesn't work because of rook captures on a3, and now after Botvinnik plays queen to c1 check, king g2, and queen captures on a3, now you get queen to d5 check. And now after king f8, you get bishop to d6, and this wins the queen on a3. So, tricky move. But of course, after queen to a5, Botvinnik still didn't fall for that. He played rook to a8, now comes queen to d2, rook back to c8, and here Tal played his 40th move, king to g2. We have queen to d7 by Botvinnik, and now h4. So now Tal is waiting for Botvinnik to decide which move he will seal, as the game has to be adjourned. It's move 41, and Botvinnik, after thinking for a while, he didn't have a lot of time to think, but he played queen to g4. And after analyzing the game for the entire night, it was in this position that Botvinnik actually resigned the game without even continuing the game. And it seems like a very odd decision, because it doesn't seem like Tal has a way to actually force a win here. But Botvinnik, after spending the entire night analyzing it, he's down a pawn and he doesn't see himself winning the game. He does give one variation, for example queen to a5, and after queen goes back to d7, now rook to f6, and now it's very hard to find a move. White will have this maneuver rook to a6, to a7, and then to g7 if if possible. But black also has to play something, and there's really not much he can play. He can capture the pawn, for example. Bishop captures on a3, but then comes a bishop to d6. And now you have to capture it. Bishop captures, now queen captures on d5 with check, grabbing the central pawn, and after king moves, now rook captures. Queen to f5, and now queen captures. Pawn captures, and now rook to a6. Attacking the passed pawn, now rook attacks the passed d pawn. D5, rook to d4, and now d6. And although it doesn't seem like the game is over, Botvinnik considers this to be winning, and it is in fact winning, but you know, you'd think that stakes being so high, I mean, it is the World Chess Championship, that Botvinnik would try to defend this against Tal. You know, he is considered the better endgame player, but you know, for some reason after Botvinnik sealed queen g4, he didn't even play it, he resigned before even playing it. So yeah, that's game number 19. I do hope you enjoyed it. Botvinnik definitely didn't, as now after 19 games he's down 4 points, and Tal is very close to to winning the World Chess Championship. Botvinnik now would have to win a couple of games in a row to get back into the game, which he will definitely try, but we will see more about this journey in game number 20. So yeah, like I said, I do hope you enjoyed it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, hopefully with another interesting game. Thank you all.